Hi everyone, good evening and welcome to our community conversation that we are calling A Moment to a Movement, LGBTQ plus allyship in Central Ohio. I'm so glad that you're with us this evening. My name is John Henderson. I'm a member here at Bethel International Church. I want to welcome all of you who are here in this room and also those of you who are tuning in online via Facebook. Before we get started, I do want to mention that we will have time at the end for a Q&A session. So if you have questions in the audience, get those ready. Well, you can ask those at the end, but those of you who are tuning in online, put your questions in the comments, and then we will get those to the stage and to our panelists at the end. So thank you again for being with us this evening. I'm so excited for this important conversation. For the past 40 years, Columbus Pride has uplifted LGBTQ plus identities and served as a source of inclusive love throughout Central Ohio and beyond. Since the first event in 1981, hundreds of thousands of lives have been changed by this movement, which continues to shape the makeup of the places in which we live, work, and play. Here at Bethel International Church, we believe that Pride Month is a time to break down barriers of judgment and exclusion and celebrate Christ's love and inclusion for all people. So I invite you to join us tonight for this special conversation as we discover how LGBTQ plus allyship can help create stronger communities in which all people can belong. Tonight we'll hear from 4 leaders in the Central Ohio community who will share their professional experiences with LGBTQ plus allyship in their workplaces, in their families, and in their social circles, offering practical tips for how you can be an ally too. We'll reflect on the legacy and the contributions of this movement across the region and consider what's next for this movement within our increasingly diverse region. So again, thank you for joining us tonight. I hope this is a meaningful conversation and it just is the start of something that continues to grow from here. So again, my name is John Henderson. I'm a member here at Bethel International Church. This is kind of the tail end of a month of Pride celebrations that we've had here on Sunday mornings in worship. But we also had a Pride Festival a few weeks ago here at the church, and then this conversation here tonight. So this is our statement as a church that we are open and affirming to all people, especially the LGBTQ plus community. So with that, I want to turn it over to our panelists, and I will just have them go down the line here. If you could introduce yourselves, say your pronouns, which mine are he, him, his. Say your pronouns, and then just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do. Josh, go ahead.
All right, so my name is Josh Culbertson. My pronouns are he, him, his. I work, my full-time job is I work at The Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center Harding Hospital, which is OSU's psychiatric hospital. There I do outpatient group therapy with young adults, so like 18 to 24-year-olds, and then I also do private practice out of an office down in Lancaster. So.
Hi, my name is Amanda Erickson. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm the Director of Education and Outreach at Kaleidoscope Youth Center, which is a drop-in center in downtown Columbus for LGBTQIA plus youth. My role is taking the safe space that we have in the drop-in center and extending it into the rest of the community through professional development, trainings, school advocacy, and the like.
Hi, my name is Pam Antos. I use she, her pronouns. I am a public schools teacher in Hilliard City Schools as my full-time job, but then I also am a professional development coordinator with GLSEN Central Ohio. GLSEN is the local chapter of the national organization GLSEN, which focuses on safer schools for LGBTQ youth, especially K through 12. We focus on 4 main supports: student-led clubs, doing professional development to have more supportive educators, inclusive curriculum, and enumerated policies.
Thank you for having us. My name is Stacy Drake, and I am a board member at PFLAG Columbus. PFLAG Columbus is an organization of parents and friends of the LGBTQ plus community. We offer support, education, and advocacy. We meet once a month online right now, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you all. Again, thanks for being here tonight. I think your perspectives will add a unique piece to this conversation. Like I told the panelists, this is not a faith conversation. This is a community conversation. That's why each of the members of this panel make up different areas of this community. So this is a broad conversation that I hope is applicable to you and your life and your journey. So let's go ahead and dive into the questions tonight. This is going to be a casual conversation, so feel free to chime in wherever you feel like you can add to the conversation. Again, we'll have time at the end for some Q&A. But the first question that I have for you tonight is just tell us about a time that you've witnessed allyship in action. That can be in your personal life, it can be in your professional life as well, and what made this a successful example of allyship?
Or we're going to fight over it. So, well, I was thinking back to when I first came out, because I came out in a very hostile work environment, very hostile social environment. I was my employers made it very clear, and I'm a gay man. I guess I didn't share that in my introduction. But what was super helpful for me was coworkers there. The person who was my direct supervisor talked openly about his lesbian sister. Had another coworker who often spoke about her brother who had been gay and had passed away due to complications related to HIV. And so it was helpful for me that even while I was getting a lot of toxicity and unkind words from the actual owners and of the business, that I knew that I had safe spaces that I could duck into and just have like a brief conversation, get some reassurance, and yeah, just know that I was safe for a little bit while still living in a part of Ohio, which is most of Ohio, where you can be fired for being LGBTQ. So,
Thanks, Josh.
I would just say as a teacher too, I have had the opportunity to see allyship in action in many different ways. Especially sometimes I may know that a student identifies as a member of the LGBTQ plus community, but other students may not know that. And so I've seen powerful moments in a classroom where another student, a friend of theirs maybe who does know, has had the opportunity to speak up or to just even physically be next to them or stand by them in the middle of a tough conversation, and just see how that helps the person relax and be able to be present. Emotional safety as well. And sorry, woo. And you know, I've seen that make a difference too many times to count.
I'm going to hop on that providing safe spaces at school kind of tangent. You know, with my role at Kaleidoscope Youth Center, we get to do a lot of work with GSAs. So a GSA is a Gender and Sexuality Alliance or Gay Straight Alliance at a middle school or a high school. And I think one of the ways that I see the biggest allyship coming through in schools from teachers, especially who want to be allies, is providing that GSA space. I think a lot of maybe cisgender straight teachers often feel like, oh, maybe it's not my place to help create this space for these students. Maybe I need to wait for an LGBTQ identified teacher to come in and provide this space. When in reality, as Josh said, it's perfectly legal in much of Ohio to be fired for being gay. So a lot of LGBTQ teachers are not coming out at work or in the classroom. And you know, any caring adult can create this space for students to be able to just exist as their authentic selves, to be in a safe space, to do, you know, the social time that they need to do after school. And so I think it's really cool when teachers are able to step up and provide that space and be that listening ear and that caring adult that students can turn to at a school, even if it's, you know, the only staff member at that school that they can talk to, which it often is.
I'd just like to add to that. I also belong to a group of that's called Mama Bears. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that here, but we are a group of moms of LGBTQ plus kids, and we do a lot of support in the community as far as I've seen it in action in the ways that one of the things that we do is we have a Facebook group that's private that offers us the opportunity to engage with LGBTQ people who are struggling, who don't have that support, who don't have a parent who's supportive, and so we're able to do that. One of the things that I think makes it work so well is that, you know, there's no real, like, expectation. We're just wanting to provide that support and love to that person. So I find that to be very effective in getting support to people. It's private. It's the other thing I'd just like to add to what Pam said is that I have the opportunity was lucky enough to have the opportunity to have a child who had Pam as a teacher in the 8th grade. And my child experienced being in a classroom that was open and safe. And it wasn't that Pam had to come out and say, you know, I have this experience, or I know this, this, and that, or, you know, it's just creating the ability to create that space and then be supportive when someone is courageous enough to speak out. My child was telling me today that she did a talk, I think, or maybe a paper about courage, and she wrote about Harvey Milk, and she did that in Pam's class, and she felt very supported in that. And I would just like to take a moment to personally thank her for all the work that she does in the schools, not just for my child, but for all of the kids in Hilliard City Schools, and support the work that she does. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. Thank you. It was an honor.
Well, thank you all. And we didn't intentionally, when we asked you all to be panelists, we didn't intentionally seek people who work specifically with young people. It's just kind of worked out that way. And I love that this conversation is moving in that direction. And we're talking about how do we support our young people and our youth who do identify as LGBTQ+.
Not to interrupt, I just want to clarify that the Mama Bears, we support adults as well.
Thank you.
That is not an offer to just people 18 and under. We serve people probably in their 40s and 50s who don't have support. So that support is open to anyone, including young people and adults.
Perfect. Thanks for the clarification. So this next question that I have for you all, I'm actually going to direct, I know some of you are parents of LGBTQ plus children, but a few of you on the panel actually identify as LGBTQ plus. So for those of you who do identify as members of the LGBTQ plus community, I want to ask you, how have you been personally impacted by allyship? When was the time that someone was an ally to you? If you could describe that experience and how that made you feel.
I don't mind starting this one. I've benefited a lot from allyship. I came out fairly late in life, but I identify as lesbian. That's probably the first time I've said it on a microphone, and especially never said it in a church. So there you go. I did it, and live streamed too, so the whole world knows now. But anyway, I have a group of Mama Bear friends who I've come to know through our Mama Bear group, and they were some of the first people that I came out to. And part of my personality, I'm an introvert, and I'm not always able to communicate things in the way that I want to. So sometimes the way that I communicate things is through media, so through music or a television show or a movie. And part of that was this movie that I was especially interested in. If any of y'all are friends of mine, y'all know what that movie is. But this group of Mama Bears joined me in going to see that movie, and we've kind of created a small group around that group of people. And I always feel seen and heard and loved. And I think what makes it that way is that feeling seen and heard is about people listening to you. And I was having this thought about, I don't want to talk to you long, but I was having this thought about saying ally is a verb, and then I thought, wait, I'm sitting next to Pam. I can't say ally is a verb, it's a noun.
Ally is absolutely a verb.
I'm like, wait, I'm sitting next to an English teacher.
Ally is a verb.
So, but allyship to me is about a relationship. So in addition to like listening, so part of it is about listening and being in relationship with LGBTQ people. And so we're listening to them and we're providing them the support that they need and in the ways that they need. We're not assuming what they need, and we're not, so listening and speaking up, not over or for, but speaking up or over or for, and also showing up, and that's really important too. And I'm blessed to have people in my life who show up for me. So thank you.
Before we continue with this question, I do want to add, I love that, the fact that allyship, that being an ally is a verb. Does anybody else want to expand on that point?
Sure. Yeah, ally is absolutely a verb, and we don't think of it as such. But I think we tend to have very well-meaning people that, you know, they are straight, they are cisgender, and they are ready to support the LGBTQ community and do not go any further. And it's almost this like fading into the shadows, or like being invisible in their perceived allyship, and like they think that they're doing it and they're like, oh yeah, I support people, but they're not really doing anything about it. It's just kind of all in their own head, right? And so when we talk about allyship being a verb, like it's about actively listening, actively standing up for people, you know, whether it is going to rallies and events or actively trying to change policies at schools or organizations, or talking to people about these topics, like it's actively doing things. And so that's what we mean when we say allyship is a verb.
If I could add to that real quick, I also want to say, and again, as an English teacher, yes, it's a verb, but I really avoid using the term ally as a noun to describe, I am a straight cisgender woman, and I think it makes me nervous when people call themselves allies, I'm going to be honest, because there are too many times that we can, well-intentioned, as Amanda said, do and say things that are reflect our lack of understanding of issues that aren't part of our lone lived experience. And so I think it's really important not to call yourself an ally, but other people will know you as allies if you practice being an ally. So do the actions, you know, make the phone calls. This year, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole of legislation, but this year we've had an unprecedented number, hundreds of anti-trans bills, most recently 2 days ago, being trying to attach it at the last minute to the budget bill. If you call yourself an ally or want to be able to call yourself an ally, I hope you're picking up the phone, you're sending an email, which Equality Ohio could not make that easier. Get connected and take the actions. And you don't have to do all the things, right? So it's great if you can go to a rally, as you said, or send an email, but you can do one of those things. One of those things just takes a few minutes. And so, again, work on the actions involved, and then you probably will be lucky enough to be known as an ally. And again, want to also just make a quick note about intersectionality, if that's okay. So this may be a term you've heard before, but coined by legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, but when we talk about being intersectional too, we want to be really clear that we're talking about showing up for all marginalized communities and groups that have experienced oppression, so whether that's fighting racism, ableism, sexism, as well as homophobia and transphobia. These systems, first of all, people's identities are complex and multifaceted, and so we can't dismantle any form of oppression without tackling all of it. So that just really making sure that we practice allyship with lots of communities.
Yeah, well, and I want to kind of expand on that a little bit too. So very early in my process of coming out, where I was still trying to even figure out if I could be okay with me, I was fortunate enough to be able to attend a conference, and one of the speakers there that I was able to hear was a young queer man who is also undocumented, and that was sort of my first confrontation with well, wait, because I've been so focused on taking care of me and just to keeping myself safe. That was my first oh my gosh, I can be an ally to someone else, and to be able to see that, and then also too, just in my I'm continually touched through the interactions I get to have, through the work that I do, And the allies that I have, both in management above me and coworkers with me, that are comfortable with me, obviously in counseling you try not to like self-disclose a lot, but through like the pride flag background on my watch or pins that I put on my lanyard at work, those little things send signals to people that like, oh, like even if I'm not out to mom and dad, maybe this is a safe person for me to talk to. And fortunately, as of today, there are no laws in Ohio that say I have to tell mom and dad if they come out to me, and I hope that that continues to stay that way.
As of today.
Yes, as of today. Yes, it's Ohio. Things change fast.
Thank you all. And Pam, I'm so glad that you brought up the point about intersectionality. I was going to say that I see several faces in this room who have been part of, within this congregation, anti-racism conversations and the anti-racism movement here in Central Ohio over the past year. So I think as we have this conversation about allyship being in action and what does this mean for our broader community, I think it's important that we understand that this is intersectional and that, as we have conversations about racism, we also have to have the conversations about LGBTQ plus inclusion as well. I know that I have been guilty of calling myself an ally, but then I step back and think, what am I really doing? Am I doing this just to say this so that people see this and it makes myself look good, or am I really leaning into the discomfort and having those tough conversations? So thank you. So now kind of to divert us back, I think we've kind of gotten there, but back to the question of personal impact and experiences with allyship. Does anybody have anything else to add to that initial question?
So I was thinking about this question all weekend because we got the questions ahead of time. Thank you for that. And I was struggling with it because I cannot think of like a specific thing that really had an impact on me. And now, like, as we're all talking, it is all of those little tiny things, right? It's all of the little tiny conversations that we have with people. And I think I've been, I've had a lot of privilege and I've been lucky in a lot of ways to not have had times that I needed like a super great ally to step in and like protect me from something or save me from something. And, when I was coming out, like it was the other queer folks that I turned to. It was like, hey, I experienced this thing. Like, is that normal? Is that a thing? And I had folks who were, I was 22 at the time, and I had folks who were slightly older than me who were able to mentor me and talk me through that. And I think that is a form of allyship within our own community. Once I moved to Columbus, almost 10 years ago now, my very first social group was a bunch of other LGBTQ people because we seek each other out and we create these social groups. And those folks were there to support me as well. So I think in a way, like I'm lucky to not have needed necessarily somebody to jump in at certain times. And it's all of these little things that happen along the way and those relationships that we make.
Perfect, thank you. Anyone else? All right, thanks. Let's move on to the next question. So now we've kind of talked about personal experiences. Let's move a little bit into the action steps. And what can those of us, those in the room, those watching online, who are wanting to become allies, whether as an individual or as an organization, what are some helpful things that they should keep in mind?
Why am I always talking first? I'm the introvert. I'm not supposed to talk first. But anyway, one of the things that's been on my mind is out of my mind now. So I'm going to check my notes for a minute. Helpful for allies is that one of the things is having queer people at the table when you're making decisions about things. So one of the things that I've seen is that we have institutions and people who are well-meaning and churches even making decisions and about slogans or different types of things that they think are going to help queer people, and they don't have queer people at the table telling them what's going to be helpful. And what they're doing may not just be not helpful, but even harmful. So I think one of the things is, making sure that you have queer people at the table when you're talking about how we can be helpful. And the second thing that's just really important to me is not making it about yourself. A lot, and I did this at first, so I'm not calling anybody out or being judgmental, because when my kids came out, I did a lot of making it about myself. So, and it's not about you. So when I was working on the Hilliard Pride Committee, and we had Pride yesterday, which was awesome, and I was working on some signs for and props for pictures and stuff like that. And somebody came up to me afterwards and made a big deal that there weren't any ally signs. And so I was talking to somebody else, and I'm like, oh, really? Is it about you? Like, you can't use a love is love sign, or I don't know, was Pride about? I mean, so anyway, I just think it's really important that we focus less on ourselves. And so some of the support in having kids who came out to me and worrying about what other people think, and I think we need to, instead of putting that on our kids, we need to put that on people who are in the same situation that we're in and get our support from somewhere else. So we're gonna have those feelings, right? So if somebody comes out to us and it's our own child, we're gonna be worried about them. We're gonna be worried about their safety. We're gonna worry about what other people think, specifically at our churches. We're gonna worry about, a lot of things, and we're going to think a lot of things that we shouldn't be saying to them. And if we need to say them, we need to find people who are supportive, who can talk about that with us. It's okay to feel those things and think those things. We're gonna do it, but we need to not put it on them. People who are LGBTQ+ are intimately aware of judgment and safety issues. So worrying about what your parents are worrying about isn't something we need to add to that. Or so anyway, those are kind of just some of the important things to me.
So another thing you can do as far as an individual and as an organization, do things like include your pronouns in your email signature. That just sends, before someone's even met you, if they've exchanged emails with you, sends a signal that you don't make assumptions about other people, that you recognize that you have a gender identity, because yes, we all have a gender identity, and that we shouldn't make assumptions that way. If you are, I forget, is this the question about, oh no, this is not really about the right question about that, so I'll let somebody else add.
I think an additional thing is to educate yourself and find resources that are out there to educate yourself with. That can include, talking with folks to find out what kinds of things they might recommend, but it doesn't necessarily include asking them to do all of that work for you. And I think this is really important, in all of the different marginalized communities that are out there, things that we always need to be thinking about when we're trying to learn about identities that are different than our own. Don't put that labor on other folks. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it is helpful to, in whatever ways you can, communicate to those that come into your spaces that you are safe. Again, when I was first coming out in southeastern Ohio, I very quickly learned through word of mouth and through people, where was it safe for me to go to get a drink? Where was it safe? What coffee shops were safe for me to go to? I had a really uncomfortable encounter where a lot of my conflict was tied up in religious stigma and things of that nature, and very conservative religious perspectives. And so I was at a coffee shop one day, and one of the men from that church came in and sat down and just basically, started letting me know what he thought about me and what I had done. And I commented to one of the baristas after he left, and they immediately let me know, if that ever happens again, let us know, and he will be asked to leave. But to the subject of pronouns, I think that is amazing, and also like it's become such a part of like, you know, at Ohio State, like it's part of like the template for like the signature. And I was on a training recently where people were generally like they put it there because it's there, but they genuinely didn't know why they were putting it there. So I think it's really important to continue to talk about that and why that's important. And also, I think even for those of us that are cisgender, because I've definitely seen folks that are cisgender be like, you know, he, she, they, them, whatever, I don't care what you call me. I think that when those of us that are cisgender act like our pronouns don't matter, that sends a message that they don't matter for others. And I think that that's not a good message to send. So.
It's trivializing the whole concept.
Thank you.
One
all.
last,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
just one
No.
last thing I was going to add is if you're with an organization too, it's important to put your money where your mouth is. So obviously, and we see this especially with large corporations that, you know, may trot out that float for the Pride Parade, but then may also simultaneously be contributing money towards campaigns that are actively working to disenfranchise members of the community. And so, you know, you can't have it both ways. So, or you can't have it both ways successfully, let me put it that way. So make sure that your allyship is lived out in all areas of your organization. And if you're going to talk the talk, walk the walk.
Thank you all, and that's exactly what I was going to add to that as well. As you know, as an organization, it feels like in 2021 that it's the thing to do, to put your pronouns in your email signatures or your Zoom names, or to be in the Pride Parade here in Columbus. But you have to have those conversations about why. You know, why are we doing this? Are we just doing it because we want to be seen, or are we doing it because we truly care? So thank you all. So this question is a two-parter. Some of you have kind of touched on this piece as well, but the second part of this question is, in what ways can those attempting to extend allyship to members of the LGBTQ+ community unintentionally cause harm? So we mean well, but our actions actually are harmful in the end. So can any of you speak to that?
This makes me think of Amanda's point about the importance of educating yourself, just not ever thinking that you're done. Because again, language is constantly changing, and I know sometimes people say, well, I just don't understand, how can there be this many terms for sexual identity or for orientation or gender identity? And the reality is language is always shifting and changing. English teacher hat for a moment. You know, we have words in the language now, binge watch, cyberbully, that just didn't exist when I was growing up. So language is always changing to describe our realities more. And so just, you can unintentionally cause harm if you think you're done learning and you stop educating yourself. And I also think of Amanda's point that not expecting members of the community to constantly educate you, that if you're always going to that and saying, okay, well, let me ask you because you're, you know, and that can really put an unfair burden on those that you know that are members of a community.
There's also kind of this assumption that that's all we want to talk about. Gay people have hobbies too. Ask us about our hobbies. Like, and I hear it from a lot of different people, like all of the, you know, conversations that people try to start or the jokes that they try to make, like it all kind of stems back to their LGBTQ identity. And there's so much more to a person besides that. I've somehow made a career path out of talking about queerness, and I'm an exception. Like most other folks don't spend 40 hours a week talking about LGBTQ identities, right? So along with educating yourself, like also know that your queer and trans friends like want to talk about other things as well, not just their identities all of the time.
I think that's true, but I'd like to add a little bit to that just as someone who came out later in life, because I spent most of my life not out, okay? So I'm a little on the hyper over sensitive side, and I was just thinking, wait, should I have a hobby? My hobby is kind
Queerness
of
can
like
be your hobby. I
mean, it kind of is at this point, but you know, I lost a lot of time, so I'm trying to make up. But so I was actually talking with a friend about this a while back, but she was saying, you know, how it shouldn't be important for people to come out and how her kids didn't think it was important to come out. You know, she has young kids that are my age, young adult children. And so for them, it may not be important. And I think that's something else that we have to really understand, is that not every LGBTQ plus person has the same needs. And as a person who came out late in life, it was really important for me to have an identity, to state the identity, and to be very loud about it. So, so while it may be important for some people, it may be less important for others. I think it's important to know that we need to meet people where they are too.
Yeah, and sort of on that note, which also you're talking about, that makes me think there's an incredible documentary that I love. I don't know if it's like 3 or 4 different stories they follow, but it's called Out Late. I don't know if any of you have seen it or not, but it's about 3 or 4 people that came out after the age of 65. So it's never too late to come out. It's a really cool documentary, so I highly recommend it. And I had another thought.
There's a lot of nuance in all of these conversations too. Like, everything is correct, everything that everyone has said, and it'll seem like it's contradicting, and that's fine, that's great, it's all correct. And so I think that's something to keep in mind as an ally, is that there's no one right answer to any of the questions that you're ever gonna ask. And yeah, it's complicated and confusing, and that's great. And just kind of like sit in that being complicated, and don't try to find all of the answers and insist on one right answer that will never change.
And one thing I think that all of us, I think, up here would say, like you really cannot overemphasize enough, like, the importance of even just like one supportive person in a kid's life. Just being able to have that one person they can go to, that one safe space that can make so much difference. It can literally save lives. So just, you know, and as someone who is part of the LGBTQ community myself, I sometimes have to like tap my own brakes, because I'm like, there's this whole world out here, and like, I want you to be a part of it, and like, I'm so excited, and you need me to just sit with you. You need me to just be with you where you are. And that is an incredibly special and privileged place to get to sit as they navigate that journey, because I had a lot of incredibly patient people with me, you know, talking about meeting people where they are, you know, and I'm talking about that man who confronted me in that coffee shop, but like, I was once one of those toxic voices. I was trying to fix myself, believed that it was my job and purpose to try to fix others, and, you know, and now I get to sit on this stage with these amazing, incredible people and to talk about what it truly means to be an ally. And yeah, so there's times that I still like pinch myself, because I know that me 12 years ago would be like, no, like that. But yeah, so anyway, that's all.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. Thank you all. I think that's a perfect segue into our next question. I'm looking around the room here, and I'm sure online as well. I see several faces who I know work with children, youth, college students, either here at this church or in the community, some teacher faces in the audience as well. So this next question is specifically kind of taking us back to our conversation that we were having earlier about young people, kind of expanding on what you just said, Josh. So those of you who work with youth in a professional capacity, that could be children, that could be teenagers, could be college students as well. How can older adults support LGBTQ young people?
Believe them and listen to them. Number one place to start. Every single individual person is the absolute expert in their own experience, no matter how young they are. And we often get caught in this trap of thinking, I'm an adult, so I know better than you. Or, how could you possibly think that if you haven't had such and such experience? Or, you're only 5, what are you talking about? But every single person has some idea of who they are, even if they are so young they don't have language for it, even if they've never met anybody else like them before. And so what we need to do as adults is just to sit there and listen to whatever it is they have to say and believe them. Don't try to change anything. Don't try to, put words to it necessarily. Just believe their situation and then offer support if support is needed.
Can I piggyback off that, please? So one of the things that really bothers me a lot is when people say, oh, you're too young to know, or, are you sure? Are any of us ever sure about anything? And I think when we tell young people or we question them like that, we're telling them not to trust themselves. And a lot of people are growing up, and I know I did. I didn't trust my own knowledge of myself. And so I think it's really obviously important to affirm and support, but also know that it's a discovery process. So people aren't making decisions about who they are, they're discovering who they are. And you may discover bits and pieces at different points in your life. So what you discover today may be a little bit different than what you discover 10 years from now, and those things can still both be true. But we're all evolving as people, and we're discovering. We're not making decisions about who we are, we're discovering who we are. And I think it's really important to make that distinction, because people don't decide to be a certain sexual orientation or to have a certain gender identity. It's honestly about discovery.
And something else too, that whether you're working with youth and you have an office, whether you have a classroom, is making sure that you are both visually and verbally supportive before you know whether you have anyone in class or that you're working with that needs that support, because youth are always, and adults are always looking for signs of whether it is going to be safe to be who they are before they will, usually before they will reveal that. And again, we know that how much energy it takes to conceal part of ourselves. That will detract from whatever relationship or working relationship you have with youth if they don't feel like they can bring their whole selves to that relationship and interaction. So there are many great safe space signs out there available for free online. Obviously, GLSEN has some. Just go to worldwideweb.glisten.org. Learning for Justice, formerly known as Teaching Tolerance, is a wonderful organization that has signs you can print off. Really encourage you to have safe space signs posted publicly. Stickers, there are safe space stickers you can get as well. And then to work on, the more you can work on using, especially if you're working with groups of young people, gender neutral language, right? So especially working with, especially when we talk to people who work with youth in, say, pre-K through 5th grade, it's quite common, a lot of us do what we were used to growing up. And so instead of saying, okay, now boys line up and then girls line up, to that young person who's sitting there and is thinking, well, I don't feel like a girl or a boy. They may be non-binary, they may be gender fluid, they may be gender non-conforming. And so, there's so many other ways to use language. It just takes, with a little bit of practice, it can take a little work, but with that practice, it's actually a lot easier than you may think. So if your last name begins with A through L, we're gonna have you go ahead and line up on this side. And if your last name begins with M through Z, you're gonna be on the other side. If you're wearing red, would you go ahead and line up in this group? Or if you're wearing blue, or, there's so many ways to do it. So really practicing, trying to be very, very deliberate. I'm gonna tell a quick story about my son who came out when he was gay, or pardon me, came out when he was in high school. He was also gay at the time, but came out as gay when he was a junior in high school. And, he said at the time, and this is 10 years ago, so I think it's changed in many ways now, but he would not have felt comfortable taking a boy to prom, let's say, because, if you're in, a lot of times high school students obviously have 5-6 different classes a day, and if every class you're in, you hear a teacher say, hey guys, make sure you tell your date tonight that her dress looks pretty. Seems like a harmless enough comment, right? It's actually what we call a microaggression, because it sends, without seeming to be exclusive, it sends out a very powerful message that if your date is not someone of the opposite gender, then you don't quite fit in, and that's not normal, and we don't expect that. So easy enough to just say, hey folks, make sure you tell your date tonight that they look great, or that, so with some little quick changes, we can use more inclusive language.
Yeah, and pay attention to things if you work at a facility that uses forms and things like that. Look, like, what are the options available on the form? Like, I've got one in my workplace that I'm fighting to try to get changed right now, currently. And also, like, we're constantly like looking at our curriculum. Like, are we using, binary language, or are we using like more inclusive language, and reevaluating that. So yeah, even on paper, it does matter too.
I think a lot of times we do those things because it's just what we've done for so long. We don't think about it. We're not being intentional. To kind of tell you a little bit about my personal journey, I actually used to be on staff in this church, and I've worked in churches throughout Central Ohio, several other congregations. And a lot of times, either in the bulletin or in worship, we would say, men sing this part and women sing this part, or men read this part of the prayer and women read this part of the prayer, just because that's what we've done for years. And we aren't sitting down and intentionally having those conversations. So thank you all for bringing that point up. Anything else that you have to add to that question?
I think as you're talking about, like, this is the way we've always done things, absolutely true. And trans people have always existed, and non-binary people have always existed. And this is not a new thing that we're just talking about now, right? It's just that we have been able to create much safer spaces than we had decades ago, and so people are feeling more comfortable coming out, and feeling more comfortable being their whole authentic selves. And so, when I was in elementary school in the 90s and everybody was saying boys and girls, boys and girls, boys and girls all the time, yes, that's what we were hearing, and it was uncomfortable for some students then. And nobody would have spoken up, and nobody would have told the teachers, like, maybe this is a thing you shouldn't be saying. And 30 years later, it's not that anything has changed in terms of like who is in the room. It's just that we have become more inclusive and understand better ways to use language to continue creating those safer spaces.
Thanks, Amanda. That's an important clarification. So now I want to move us to a more broad conversation to talk a little bit about the movement, the LGBTQ movement here in Central Ohio. Some of you are of different generations. You've seen how things have shifted and changed over the years. So I want us to kind of think over the next 5 years, dream a little bit. How do you see the LGBTQ movement here in Central Ohio changing, shifting in the next 5 or so years? What are the dynamics at play?
Well, because I know some of us were, or maybe all of us were at Lake Hilliard Pride yesterday. Well, at least 3 of the 4 of us were. And I think that is something that is encouraging to me, and so knowing that like communities like Newark have had a Pride, and that Reynoldsburg had a Pride, and there's some great stuff going on up in Westerville right now. And as someone that, and I'm originally from Zanesville, so I'm well outside of that, but the bubble's expanding. And I think we're both at a time when in some ways we are much more marginalized and progress is still being made. So I see that as encouraging. And I feel like support for LGBTQ plus issues on some levels is becoming less of it's becoming more challenging to discern where someone's going to be on those issues based on where they might be on other issues. So,
Yeah, I think especially with one kind of maybe nice, I don't know if it's an outcome of the pandemic or the fact that Stonewall Columbus couldn't have the big typical Pride Parade, maybe is partly behind what has inspired so many local communities to hold their own celebrations this year. At the same time, I kind of think it's kind of as Josh was saying, a both and. Like we need the big things happening, and we also need the local organizing to happen. There are now, I believe, just as of last week, Hilliard finally passed a non-discrimination ordinance, an expanded one that includes the protected categories of sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. And there are 33 other cities in the state of Ohio, I believe, that have those as well, many of whom have done that more recently in the last couple of years. You're seeing more local organizations such as the Westerville Queer Collective, Rainbow Hilliard, Rainbow UA, lots of local organizations that kind of more organizing happening, and that's really exciting. At the same time, though, we're still fighting an even more seems like everywhere backlash, right? So the bills that that I was mentioning earlier. So it's kind of a both and. We're seeing lots of progress, but whenever we have times, we know in our culture where there's lots of progress, there's also lots of backlash.
I think Upper Arlington is getting ready to vote on a non-discrimination ordinance coming up as well, so I'm sure they could use support. And I've already lost my train of thought, so.
Well, but those city council meetings are so important to show up and
Right.
that is also one of those spaces where saying, well, I support them, and then sitting in your living room, like that's not, go to the city council meetings, you know, whether you speak or not, wear some sort of visible form of support. It's helpful for the movement. It's helpful, I mean, city council members are human beings. And if all they're seeing is an angry mob of opposition, I mean, that's pretty intimidating. And so they need to see, like, oh, this is not the only voice that's out there.
So I think that ties right into the second part of this question that I was going to ask, is how will allyship be a part of the future of the movement here in Central Ohio?
So I think we're seeing, as much as we're seeing backlash, we're also seeing some movements. So for instance, I think PFLAG, for instance, kind of had a lull in its movement, and we're seeing that pick up now as we see more people becoming supportive of LGBTQ plus people and policy, and fighting those policies. And PFLAG, you know, supports all of those non-discrimination policies at the local, state, and national level, and it's important to have those policies in place at all levels of government. So, and we need people to show up for us there. But I think it's also important to look back at what we're talking about, what Pam mentioned earlier with intersectionality, and make sure that we're standing up for people who are on the margins of our own community. Speaking for myself, it's my job to say, you know, Black queer lives matter, Latinx queer lives matter, Asian queer lives matter, and so that's part of my work in allyship in the future, is making sure that those intersections are being addressed and being supported, and moving the conversation forward to that. But also just this, having this conversation in a church, streaming it online, is in itself part of this movement forward, and it's important to keep having these conversations around those things.
From where you sit, are you seeing, we have this conversation around intersectionality. We are a white appearing panel here on this stage. Many of us in this room are white appearing. Is the conversation around intersectionality happening in Central Ohio? Are things getting better?
That's such an interesting question. I think it's happening in some places. I'm nervous that it's not happening everywhere, and I hope that it is. As we see all of these, you know, smaller towns and cities having their own pride celebrations, having their own pride groups, like I hope that all of those individual groups are keeping in mind their need to be intersectional in their approach. And I hope that they are not just like groups of allies trying really hard to be allies. I hope that they're centering the queer voices and centering the voices of people of color in all of the work that they're doing moving forward.
Thank you. Anybody else have anything to add to that?
And transgender people, I
Yes.
think I left that out. I mean, it's really important for our community, not just the community at large, but the LGBTQ plus community, to be supportive, inclusive, and allies to our trans. It's about everybody being human, right? So valuing every human, and that includes our trans sisters, brothers, and babies.
Thank you. Alrighty, before I give the panelists the floor for any final thoughts, I do want to open it up to any questions. So Amy, if we have any questions online, feel free to send those to my phone. But if anybody has any questions for the panel here in the room, I will go ahead and bring the mic to you.
Hi, I'm a teacher, and I teach in the Worthington district, and I've noticed there are a lot of titles in young adult literature lately where I'm seeing great representation. Do you have authors you can point us to for adult readers?
So the American Library Association has a group that publishes the Rainbow Book List annually, and it's split into like children's books, young adult books, adult fiction, adult nonfiction. And if you just Google ALA Rainbow Book List, it will pull up all of the most current books.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and I wouldn't assume that adults can't be reached through young adult literature, because often, I know when I was going through my exploring, I was reading, it became very clear to me very quickly that there were people that could make the argument either for, being gay and being a Christian was okay, or being gay and being a Christian was not okay, and there were a line of PhDs on both sides, but it was actually a young adult fiction novel about a young person going through a conflict of their own identity and faith that actually was the most impactful for me to be able to see it third person. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. So this is my 2 cents.
And one thing that I think is really exciting about the representation that we're seeing in literature at all ages is both having the stories that center on an LGBTQ plus protagonist, let's say, and their story and their coming out or any other struggles, and also stories where a certain character just happens to be a member of the community, and that's not the main focus of the story. And so we need both kinds and all kinds, obviously, to represent the rich diversity that's in the community.
I just wanted to add that the Columbus Metropolitan Library has a session where the librarians get together and they review books like that. And I also had a question, and so I wanted to tag on to the allyship question in terms of companies that we know are rainbow washing or just participating in performative allyship. The opposite side of that would be to boycott their products, or, like Chick-fil-A, not darken that door. And when you see, like, perhaps a church bringing in Chick-fil-A sandwiches, to let them know that's not helpful. So can you talk about what else we can do to, without kicking and screaming and flipping the bird, what we can do to impact or tamp down that anti-LGBTQ rhetoric and actions?
Yeah, I feel like my response to that is a little complicated. So when I came out, I'm 45 now. I came out when I was 33. My first Pride was in 2010, and the corporatization and the commercialization of Pride is a very complicated conversation. But at 33 years old, coming from a small town, I was on the sidewalk watching my first Pride parade, and I was terrified. I was scared to death that someone was going to see me that knew me. I wasn't I was barely starting to poke a few toes out of the closet. I was not ready for any kind of real conversation and confrontation around that. And one of the things that really spoke to me is often the things that I've been around long enough to hear everyone complain about, there's too many businesses, there's too many politicians, there's too many churches, there's all the and also I'm like, those are the things that shocked me. Those are the things that I didn't expect to see, because my small town mindset didn't allow me to imagine that a political candidate or that Target or that major banks would be involved in this stuff. Chick-fil-A is a different story. Yes, I also do not give them my money. It's made me love Cane's all the more. So I think there are ways for us to be thoughtful about how we spend our money. And I think, yeah, if you are in, if I noticed, on the way coming in, there were Jersey Mike subs out there. I don't know what their stance is, but yeah, if you're involved with a church or organization and you see them doing something, they may just not know, right? So think speaking up and saying, hey, this is something I think we can do that is, maybe it's a small thing, but it's a big thing to show support. So I don't know. But yeah, that question of the interaction between the corporate world and pride is complicated for me because it is definitely a both and kind of thing.
I think also available on the HRC website is Equality Index, where you can look up companies and see what, you know, I guess they give them a score or something on there.
I think
I'm
it's
not-
a score out of 100.
Yeah. So you can also, you know, educate yourself about those things, or and then you know, make that question, pose that question to the organizations you're involved with. Are we going to support businesses that aren't supporting equality?
I think one other thing too, especially for those of us who have left churches because our children or ourselves have not felt welcome, if you're not someone who has that personal connection and you're putting up with and giving money to an organization that is still actively working to undermine our rights, LGBTQ, the LGBTQ folks' lives, I think you, it's hard. Look, it's complicated. I get it. I get that. But I think when we'll see real change is when people who don't have a personal connection start to stand up and demand better. And there are certainly places where that's more possible and less possible when we talk about faith communities. But just know that when it comes to creating real change, we need allies in every possible way, and we need them to be not just people who have connections to the community.
All right, thank you all. We are a few minutes over time, but if there's one final question from the audience, I can take one more. Does anybody else have another question? All righty, if not, I will turn it over to the panelists for some final thoughts. So we can go ahead and go down the line, and if you have anything else to add, want to talk about the work that you do, anything at all, the floor is yours.
I'll give a shameless plug for PFLAG. We're happy to provide education, support, and advocacy, and we would welcome you to come to one of our meetings. We do meet once a month. Our next meeting, I just happen to have here. You can find out more information also on our website and our Facebook page. On July 18th, Serving Proudly, our LGBTQ+ service members will speak. A National Guard member will discuss deployment, historic challenges to service, and pride in serving his country. On August 15th, we have Back to School, Creating Safer Spaces for LGBTQ+ youth. I'm pretty sure somebody sitting next to me is going to share with us what parents and educators can do for kids in classrooms, so we can kind of continue this discussion. But you know, you're welcome to join us and learn more, and learn what we're doing in the community and how the ways in which we support people and advocate on behalf of LGBTQ people, you know, in all areas of life.
Yes, so great segue there. So yeah, just know that glisten.org has lots of materials that are free for those of you who may be working with youth or just want to learn more about this. I'll leave some handouts. There's already some out on the table there as well. Some of our business cards. We would love to help provide professional development we serve schools in Franklin County as well as all the counties that touch Franklin, and even one or two beyond that as part of GLSEN Central Ohio. So we can provide professional development that's online, in person, can be a 1-hour staff meeting, can be a 6-hour workshop, and everything in between, can be on general topics such as just the creating safer spaces, and can be also very targeted. We have new modules on changing the game, which is more sports related for coaches and those who work with youth in sports situations. And so let us know how we can help you in your school.
And Kaleidoscope Youth Center is here for you with a lot of very similar education opportunities. So we are, again, primarily a drop-in center, although right now all of our programming is virtual. We're hoping to reopen yet this summer. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. But you can follow us online at KYC Ohio on all the social medias. And our programming is for youth ages 12 to 20 years old. If you know a youth in those ages, have them connect with us. All of our programming is free and confidential. And then also, if you are working with youth, we can also provide professional development training on many of the same topics that Pam talked about. If GLSEN is busy, come find us. We use a lot of the same GLSEN materials as well. They have really great data and research for school safety, for how youth are feeling in schools. And we also do some corporate trainings. So if you are a corporate business type person, if you have an ERG at your company, if you want us to visit a staff meeting and just talk about things like allyship, we are totally open to that as well.
Yeah, and I think one thing you can do to be a really an ally is to be a resource and know like what resources are available in your community. You know, in my work at Ohio State, like I do work with 18 to 24-year-olds now. Prior to that, I worked with adolescents. Like I've had to walk that fine line of like, I refer to you by one set of pronouns when we're in group and a different set of pronouns when we're out in the lobby and I'm handing you off to parents because, you know, maybe they're not out to them. But also, you know, in private practice, I've worked with teens and young adults that might be out to me that are not out to others. I've had parents come in, like my kid just came out to me. I've always been taught this is wrong. I love my kid, and I don't know what to do. And I've been able to like direct people towards organizations like PFLAG. I've been able to, you know, I've had a lot of young people. It's like, this is great. Like you, and I absolutely support you. I want to be in this journey with you. But you see me once a week, or you see me every other week. Like there's this great organization called Kaleidoscope, and you know, here's some information. Think about it, you know, and you know, I was sharing with Amanda earlier, part of the beauty of this period we've been in is that they can now, you know, currently connect through a laptop or a cell phone and not necessarily have to ask a parent to drive them. But I think just knowing what's out there and what's available and to be able to point kids to, and you know, and for a while, or adults or anyone really, but yeah, and even if I don't know what programming looks like right now, I can say like, you know, go to kycohio.org, look and see what's available. You know, look up the PFLAG Columbus page on Facebook, you know, and see what's out there. So anyway, just knowing what's out there yourself helps you help others when that comes up.
Can I put in a quick plug too for the Trevor Project? So if you are working with youth in any way, you should have Trevor Project information at also available easily online. They specialize in suicide prevention and awareness, and so want to make sure that we give a shout out to them too for anyone working with youth.
Thank you all. I think this has been an important and enriching conversation. There's been a lot of information mentioned here tonight, several resources. Our communications team will work to get that information online and to you, to those of you in the room and those of you tuning in online. We will have information. I've asked the panelists to send me any information that they have over the next couple of days. So we will have that on the church's website, mybethel.org, as well as on our social media pages on Facebook in particular. So I'll look for that over the next couple of days. But thank you all for tuning in tonight or attending here in person. It's great to kind of have this hybrid event finally, to see your faces, and those of you online, I hope you had a meaningful experience. But thank you again, and have a great night.